Hello, friends, and welcome to a special edition of the Refs Roundtable here on Wrestling with the Future. I know usually a roundtable implies other people. However, in this case, it's going to be me. I've got a couple of questions I want to answer. I've been getting some questions on social media, on both email and Twitter, and I want to go over them today. Now, to keep things fresh and interesting, I only glanced over the questions, make sure there's nothing offensive or terrible in there, and I randomized them, so I'm not going to know the order specifically as I go. That way we can keep the ideas flowing fresh in each direction. We see how they go. Now, before I get started, I want to do a quick shout out. Today's episode is sponsored by Manscaped.com. For all your manscaping needs, use promo code WrestlingFuture. That's one word, WrestlingFuture, for 20% off your purchase. Manscaped's currently got a series of packages going on, including a new bundle, which comes with a free pair of underwear, which, by the way, are the most comfortable underwear you'll ever have, a nice leather bag, ball deodorant, ball spray, and the famous Lawnmower 3.0, which is the number one shaver on the market. So, manscaped.com, promo code WrestlingFuture, 20% off. Manscaped, your balls will thank you. But now, as we continue on, like I said, I've got some questions. So, question one here, Jay asks, thoughts on the current state of the product? Jesus. Good start. Okay, the fact is, wrestling today sucks. And I'm not saying that objectively. I'm saying that compared to somebody who's been a fan for 30 years. The fact is, the product today is bad. Wrestling, at some point in the past, what, in my opinion, I've mentioned this on the show numerous times, what killed wrestling is, at some point, wrestling decided to get away from being a fight and evolving into a stunt show. And you see that in the companies today where multiple false finishes. I know we beat up on the Young Bucks on the show for having 10, 12, 15 super kicks in a match. You have somebody get power bombed through two tables, and that's not the finish. The problem is that when you have these moves that are unrealistic, or these moments that are unrealistic, or you watch these matches where people will sit there and they'll set up and they'll say it's going to take two guys that are obviously working together. Some of these moves don't work unless everyone is involved. For example, one of the ones that kills me, and I'm a fan of it because it always looks neat, is they call it the Tower of Doom spot, where somebody goes for a superplex and then somebody else comes in for a power bomb and then somebody grabs him. And next thing you know, there's 6 or 7 guys working together to do a move. If you're actually trying to fight each other, you'd never do that. The disconnect comes from the fact that I know wrestling isn't real. I get that. The problem is kayfabe is gone. You're not putting that genie back in the bottle. I get that. But you can still have a product that tries to look like a fight. Today you have wrestlers that their motivations are questionable. There's no real heel-face dynamic anymore. And these moves look fake and scripted, and it doesn't look like a fight. And by taking out the real factor, you've taken out what drives people. I get, even as a kid, when I watched these moments and you'd have some of these larger-than-life superhero characters, I wasn't seeing a real match. What I was watching was an entertaining fight. Now it's a borderline unentertaining stunt show that just doesn't capture the audience anymore. The current state of the product is hurting. You look at the Wednesday Night Wars, they call them, between AEW and NXT, and you can win the day with less than 1 million people. The largest ratings they'll have all week, maybe Raw might pull in 1 point something million. There was a point, the highest rated Raw was over 8 million viewers, and that was even by old standards. I mean, you look at the territory information, Tennessee, Memphis, Florida, a local station that maybe broadcast 100 miles from where they filmed, or maybe 100 miles into territory, would have a couple 100,000 people every week, and that was a local show. There's no town in this planet with couple 100,000 people watching wrestling every week now. You've lost the crowd because the product's just not what it used to be. And I honestly think we're past the point of no return. I'm not saying wrestling's going to die, but without some massive reset, you'll never get back to that. So the state of the product, in my opinion, is it's crap, and it's only going to get worse. And unfortunately, it's going to have to continue to get worse before it ever gets better. All right, so good one. Ray asks, do you have any favorite independent wrestlers? Well, I'm a little biased to my region. There's a couple of guys. The territory in this area is VCW. That's Vanguard Championship Wrestling, recently rebranded Virginia Championship Wrestling. And they have brought in some big names through the years. Brian Pillman Jr., he's been on the show, friend of the show. He's a phenomenal talent. He recently wrestled on AEW. I would say, as far as independents go, you have a couple of names. I know, like I said, a shout out to my VCW guys. Big Sean Studd was fun to watch. There's a local talent in this area, a tag team named Simply Safeish. You look them up. I've seen them all over. They're great, fun, and I know it's a little silly because I just criticized goofiness in wrestling, but there's a difference between goofy and silly. And like the Rockers were fun, but they never looked ridiculous. And that's Simply Savage. They're fun. They never look fake. And they're good talent. Same thing, Brian Pillman Jr. He actually mentioned on the show he would like to be the catalyst for putting wrestling back to the way it used to be. And I hope that's the case. So independent wrestlers, those guys, all great. Irvin Legend, he's going to be on the show later in the week. Later in August, excuse me. And he's another great talent. Look him up. The Phil Brown, a couple of those guys. And obviously, you've got a lot of talent. Like I said, I'm very biased to the local talent. Further up north, you have Dynamite Dave Dahl. He's a good one. Out west, there's a gentleman named Tombstone Jesus, wrestles for Devotion Championship Wrestling. Those are good guys. Check them all out. Tom says, who was your favorite heel? Well, my favorite heel of all time was Jake Roberts. Heel Jake Roberts, with the promos and the look and the way he wrestled. It was just great. Now, I would say very close. Flip a coin for how you're feeling that day. Second is Roddy Piper. But something about heel Jake Roberts with the mentality and the way he stared through your soul in the microphone, just absolutely, that was my favorite heel work. Efren asks, recommendations for good local cuisine. Your listeners can support local business and know what to eat. That's actually not wrestling related, but that is a good point. As we fight through COVID and the other problems we're having now, it's very important to support your local business, because that little mom and pop shop that hasn't had any business in a while or is struggling to pay their 2-3 employees, they need your money a lot more than McDonald's and Walmart and these big chains that can survive this. So as restaurants reopen, as we go into phase 3 and we try and return back to what everyone's going to call the new normal, I think now is more important than ever to support your local businesses and your local restaurants. Here in this area, there's a noodle shop my wife and I love going to, and we cheat a little bit. I don't know when it's going to reopen, but we have a place here in Virginia called Captain George's. It's actually the number one, it's one of the top rated buffets in the world, and it's the number one seafood buffet in America. It's very expensive, but it's got the crab legs and scallops, all the good stuff. But I would say, yeah, recommend your local cuisine, your local mom and pop shops, the small restaurants, the small delis. Best food anyway. Let's be honest, best food comes from the holes in the wall restaurants anyway. So support them. Jeremy asks, how... Okay, another non-wrestling question. Jeremy asked, how can The Mandalorian be so good while The Last Jedi is so trash? Well, for those who might be able to figure out by looking behind me, I'm also a huge nerd, geek, whatever you want to call me. Yeah, I think Star Wars hit it on the head. The Mandalorian versus The Last Jedi. I personally hated The Last Jedi. I'm sorry if you feel differently. My problem with The Last Jedi was not from the perspective of, oh, it was too different or it wasn't make me feel comfortable. I just thought it was a terrible movie. There was massive plot holes. The writing was bad. Some of the cinematography was bad. I'm from a purely film fan standpoint, I'm a cinephile anyway, that I just thought it was a terrible movie. And you have these moments that just don't make sense. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel natural. Whereas with The Mandalorian, which has been hugely successful, critically praised across the board, you had that real look. When George Lucas first made Star Wars, he created what he called the used future, because his narrative was being the anti-Star Trek, the anti-Buck Rogers, that in the future, you're still going to have poor people. You're still going to have people who might have an old ship, because let's be honest, anybody that has an antique car, sometimes the best runs for you're going to have a ship that's more dependable than the new stuff, or you think it's more dependable, or you've modified it enough in ways that it's good. And The Mandalorian looked real. Last Jedi looked like a big action movie, and everything was fancy, and it didn't fit. It didn't fit the narrative. It didn't feel like Star Wars. Mandalorian does. Rich asks, who was your favorite tag team of all time? Well, that's kind of a mix there. My favorite tag team of all time is the Rock and Roll Express. And they've always entertained me. Even today, I was falling off my seat as an adult, 36 years old, in jubilance watching them win the NWA tag titles again, which goes back to my earlier question about classic wrestling, because yes, I get it. It was scripted and they built it up and they had behind the scenes stuff, but when they got in the ring and the announcers called it like it was a real fight, and Ricky Morton worked like it was a real fight, and they had these moments and they got the pin, and Jim Cornette threw down his headset and jumped in the ring, and it just felt, it was a real emotion. It may not have been a real fight, but it felt real, and you can't get, the Rock and Roll Express got that emotion out of me more than anybody. And I think today too, one of the big problems people have is they talk about being over. And if you want to see a pop, go on YouTube, I don't know if it's on the WWE Network, but I know it's on YouTube, and look up Ric Flair defending the NWA title against Ricky Morton. When Ricky Morton came out, that is the kind of pop that wrestlers today wish they could get. To say that the Rock and Roll Express was over is an understatement to what that word means. To say how beloved they were. You watch the tapes from the territories, and fans would jump the barricade and go after the heels when they were feuding with the Rock and Roll Express. There's stories from the Midnight Express where they had to start getting police escorts because fans would figure out which car was theirs and would just slash their tires and vandalize their car in the parking lot because they were messing with the Rock and Roll Express. And as a kid, I can't, there's nobody that's recaptured that magic. I mean, there's been some great tag teams I've seen, like the Road Warriors, and I loved Demolition because I was of that age that they were targeted to. And you had the Midnight Express, even though they were heels, I appreciated what they were doing. The Heavenly Bodies, even though they were heels, I appreciated what they were doing. Some of these teams, but just the Rock and Roll Express just did it for me in ways that I've never seen. And to this day, I mean, I watch them wrestle and they still get that reaction. I've had the pleasure of seeing them live only a few years ago. I mean, well past prime, and still the best thing on the card. Just great stuff. All right, what's next? Jason asks, thoughts on WWE being classified as essential in Florida? Well, that's kind of an older story, but yeah, obviously, in order to be able to record their shows back when Florida was first cracked down, the WWE was declared an essential business. It was convenient that it was declared an essential business right after Lyndon McMahon's organization gave $18 million to the governor, which I'm sure had nothing to do with it. But the problem with declaring WWE an essential business is you kind of spit on what that word means. And I mean, don't get me wrong, as a wrestling fan, I'm glad that somebody out there was still doing something, and the WWE was able to get away with it because they had their own building and they own their own arena, which is why WWE and AEW have been able to record shows during the pandemic, while NWA had to put Power on hold because they didn't own the arena they were filming in. But the problem is, when you declare something essential, you give more power to the company. You have wrestlers who don't want to perform or might feel uncomfortable performing that now have to. You're essential. You're going to be on TV. Sure, someone like a Roman Reigns who has a legitimate reason for not performing can step away, but what about some of the minor guys, some of the guys that are fighting for their spot? They don't want to give up that opportunity, but at the same time, they might not want to be put in that situation. And when you declare yourself an essential business, it hurts that name. I think it's a black eye to the WWE and their empty arena shows. I mean, obviously the ratings have reflected how much fans care about that. Hopefully things can recover, but we'll see. I'm not a fan of that mentality. Andy asks, do you have a favorite match? Yes. And I know it's cheating because it's often a lot of people's favorite matches, but my favorite match is Savage Steamboat WrestleMania 3. As a kid, I remember, obviously the hype was Hogan-Andre. I mean, that was a moment. Hulk Hogan slamming Andre the Giant is the greatest moment in WrestleMania history, period. No, nothing before or since has topped that. You cannot get that. You'll never get that spectacle again, that mentality again. But it was not by any means the greatest match on the card. The greatest match on the card, Savage Steamboat. Flair Steamboat's another good one, but Savage Steamboat, because it just captured everything. You had the Miss Elizabeth factor, George Steele, heel Savage, which is premium work, face Steamboat, over as hell, two great workers for the Intercontinental title, which meant something. Back then, that was the workhorse. You held the Intercontinental Championship, you knew that was the belt, and I say belt, not title, belt. That was the belt that signified you were the greatest worker in the company. And really, pound for pound, it's hard to find somebody of that generation that could go in the ring better than Steamboat. And the scoop slam into the small package, the false finishes, the flying, the mix, the chops. It was just a technical masterpiece that aged well. I mean, you watch some of these matches that people consider classics, and maybe by today's standards, they're not as well remembered, or they didn't age as well, or just something about them just doesn't seem right. Flair, fuck, did it again. Savage Steamboat is, without question, it ages well, and it works the best. I just think it's phenomenal, and it's my favorite. I've recommended it to people when they say, is there a match I should watch to get into wrestling or to refresh my palate? And that's what I go to. WrestleMania 3, Savage Steamboat, my favorite match of all time. Lee asks, you mentioned before being a geek. Do you have any thoughts on the outrage tied to Last of Us 2? Well, that's a topical question. Yes, I am a geek. And now, for those of you that might not understand this, because I know this is a wrestling channel, The Last of Us 2 was a video game that Sony released for the PlayStation 4. It's a Sony exclusive from the company Naughty Dog. That was a sequel 7 years in the making. Last of Us came out in 2013. The outrage tied to it that he's talking about has to do with 3 points. The first was a leak, which was originally reported to be from a disgruntled employee, which leaked story plot points, character points, and basically ruined the narrative if anyone read up on it. The second bit of outrage was what was called a review bomb. When the game first came out, fans, unfortunately, maybe not fans, I don't know, maybe just trolls, review bombed the game on websites like Metacritic, giving it 1 star, 2 stars, and the score plummeted to the point where Metacritic, now they claim it's not in retaliation of Last of Us 2, they had to change their policy on how long games have to be out before you can review them. And then the third bit of outrage, the one that just is disgusting, is the actress who voiced Abby, the character that most people had a problem with, received threats. And, I mean, the idea that you can bully a celebrity for a part they played. Now, there are times when actors' performances are the reason something is terrible. Maybe a bad accent or an actor's just not right for a part. But they're actors playing a part. When you have a script that's bad, or editing that's bad, or just a story that's bad, that's not the actor's fault. How many bad movies, ask yourself, how many bad movies have you seen where actors do everything they can with the crap they're given, and maybe it's a good performance in a bad movie, or the performance is remembered well, but the movie not so much. Something like a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where Sean Connery's performance was pretty much universally praised in a movie that was critically panned. Movies, or it goes the other way. Movies like Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Gary Oldman, and these universally praised film with Keanu Reeves being criticized for his terrible British accent. You can't blame actors for roles like that. And the mentality of today, social media age, you saw it with Star Wars, Kelly Marie Tran. Unfortunately, in the wrestling business, you've seen it with some of these recent issues that speaking out, and the Me Too movement and other things, where fans have decided that, I don't like this match, I don't like this moment, I'm going to attack the wrestler, attack the actor, attack the voice artist. And that just makes no sense. My thoughts on that is, how small does your dick have to be to bully a woman over a voice role she did because you didn't like the character she played? And now I'll tell you right now, the character, I didn't like the story. I spoke previously about the game on a different channel, and I gave it a 7, and I didn't like the character. The character was great. My biggest criticism with the character was lazy writing. The problem was, writers often get confused with a good character and a likable character. Just because a character is good doesn't mean they're inherently likable. And when you spoon feed little things, I'm not going to try and ruin any plot, game's only a few weeks old, but when you spoon feed little moments, not every villain is Loki. Not every villain is likable. Not every villain is redeemable. You can be a good character, a good, enjoyable, I'm glad you were in this movie, glad you were in this game character, and still be a piece of shit. But the problem is, the game tries so hard to make you like this character and understand this character and redeem this character that the rest of the game suffers because moments don't make sense. the ending hurts because the character's actions have to be shoehorned in around this narrative that she's the good guy, she's the one you're supposed to be rooting for, when in reality you have a character that is a bad person. Just because I don't mind playing as a villain or someone I don't like. I don't like being spoon-fed the crap. Now, I would never bully the actress over that, but I don't think the game deserved what happened. She certainly didn't. You saw that with Star Wars. You've seen that with other things. My opinion on the outrage is it's disgusting, and anybody who partakes in it is a piece of shit. Plain and simple. If you bully someone you've never met entirely because you didn't like a movie or something they did, you're a piece of shit. That's the best way I can sum it up. All right, Matt asks, what are your thoughts on the speaking out trend on Twitter? Well, funny, I literally just mentioned that. Speaking out was a hashtag trend which was wrestling's version of the Me Too movement. Numerous wrestlers and personalities and managers and valets and other people came out and spoke out about rampant abuse in the wrestling business. And several high-profile names were outed as being sex offenders. Not in the sense, many of them, some of them as pedophiles in that they knew girls were underage and they still pursued them sexually or sent them illicit photos. People who were handsy against their will, cornered women, touched women, inappropriate conversations, people in positions of authority that dictated sexual favors in relation to career advancement. It was a disgusting, absolutely just disgusting display because you saw the dark side. And now I entirely support the victims here. Understand that. When I say disgusting display, I'm talking about the perpetrators. And several high-profile names lost their jobs. Several people were suspended, fired indefinitely. Careers have been besmirched. Some big names, like in the WWE with, excuse me, in the WWE with Jack Gallagher. You had some NXT UK had to get rid of several people. Obviously, the biggest name to come through everything, the one that got the most attention, definitely not the biggest name because he's trash, was Joey Ryan, who had multiple women. I mean, big fucking shock there, right? Who would have thought that somebody whose entire gimmick is tricking people into touching his penis against their will turned out to be a sex offender? What a shock. And you had these moments and these people speaking out, and the thing is, when you have a victim who comes forward, his strength inspires other victims, and you have a snowball effect, and more people get outed, and more victims come forward, and it continues to this day. Even as we speak, there's more stories coming out, more information coming out, more people being outed. And that's good. You have to sweep this trash out of the business. Wrestling is too precious as it is. It's on thin ice. Some territories are struggling to survive. Indie companies are struggling to survive. Even the mainstream companies are hurting. And you can't have that. You need the best people in position now. And when you have something like this, the immense bravery that it took to come forward for some of these women and these men, and it's commendable. I commend the victims. I believe all the benefit of the doubt goes to all of them. And in many cases, their allegations were instantly proven. Now, unfortunately, as with any movement, there was some negative backlash in that people were using the speaking out hashtag to just pursue vendettas, mistresses or maybe an ex going after somebody. Oh, well, it wasn't sexual assault, it was an affair, and he wouldn't leave his husband for you, so you're going to call him a rapist. That's not true. But the thing that got me with that was how quickly the victims rallied around each other. And you saw numerous trends, numerous posts saying, look, don't use this for your own gain, you're hurting the real story. And those people were quickly outed as well by the victims, and you had this strong unification, and you saw people from all walks of the industry, men, women, across the board, stepping forward in support. Many of them, I think the best example is Candice LeRae, who was friends with Joey Ryan. He was in her wedding, and she straight up like, look, I don't care how close we are, you're a piece of shit, and I'm heartbroken that my friend turned out to be this way, but you have to step on it. And she did. She stepped away, and she took the stand, and that was good for her, and a lot of other people did that. They distanced themselves from sometimes lifelong tag team partners or lifelong managers, because you can't let friendship blind you. I had a personal issue with it. A friend of mine was accused by another friend of mine, and it's hard being in the middle like that. But when you have victims, you have to give the benefit of the doubt to the victim. At the same time, you have to not crucify the accused without at least getting the whole story. And that's the greatest thing, is people rallied around it. It wasn't an immediate call for hangings. There was a pursuant of, let's talk about this. You're absolutely right. This did happen. That did happen. The internet detectives took over. And much like in the case of, say, like a Bill Cosby, at 8, 9, 10, 12, 15 women coming out against one guy, a handful of guys coming out against one guy, you had a moment where you realized that, how many victims need to come forward before you realize, hey, these people are telling the truth. And that's a powerful moment. And the speaking out movement has helped sweep out a lot of the trash. Wrestling has improved maybe not the quality of what's being seen on TV, but the quality of what's being seen backstage already drastically improved. And really, anything that gets Joey Ryan off TV is a huge win in my book. So I commend the honor and the bravery of those victims that have come forward. I'm sure there's more of them out there. Hopefully they'll find the strength as well. I can only imagine what they're going through, because I'm not been part of it. So you can't put yourself in their mindset, but you have to commend them every step of the way. And that's 10 questions. I'd love to end on a more positive note, but like I said, I randomized them. So it's nice to do these periodically. Like I said, any questions on social media, for those who have already reached out, I can be found on Twitter at theman_WWTF. I can be found at email at theman.wwtf@outlook.com. For Wrestling with the Future, for the Refs Roundtable, I'm Dan Sebastiano. I've said a lot today, and I will see you next time I have something to say.